Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.
Welcome everyone to another edition of the Smart City Podcast. I'm Jim Frazer, Vice President of Smart Cities here at ARC Advisory Group. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Melissa Wiley, a data analyst for the city of Gainesville in Florida, as well as Katie Patrick, an environmental engineer, author, and a developer of many different initiatives. So I'm very happy to have both of you here today, talk about smart cities. Perhaps each of you can start by just telling us a little bit about what brings you to the smart city ecosystem.
Well, I was an environmental engineer, and then I worked in green building, and then had a media company, which then inevitably moved into digital media, which took me to Silicon Valley. And I was so frustrated with making content to try and tell people or inspire people to be environmentally friendly. I used to make magazines and videos and host events and try and convince the property industry and corporations and individual people. And I was thought, I don't know if anything I'm doing is really working. I really need to make sure that it's actually making measurable change. And so I got quite obsessed with trying to figure out where I could get the data from. And I was living in Silicon Valley, learning how to code, hanging out with lots of hackers and computer programmers and startups. And I thought, well, why can't I just get a feed of somebody's electricity and I can actually show it in real time, like on a thermometer that could plug into someone's Facebook. Maybe I could get a feed of how much water someone's using. Maybe I could figure out what the air pollution is. And I immediately saw that I just could not get this data. And this was about 8 years ago now. And every single metric I looked for, whether it was trash or forest or air pollution, there just wasn't the computer infrastructure for me to get this data that I wanted to show to people as a way of encouraging them to make change, just to basically say, you use this much, maybe you could get it down, and maybe I'll give you a smiley face and a red dot notification. The stuff that I saw happening all around me in Silicon Valley was not happening in sustainability with environmental metrics. And then I was thought, just like, boom, this is really where it's at. This is going to be the next kind of chapter of urbanism and technology and the planet, to really measure all this data and then figure out how to show it to people in a way that creates change. And so I've been hooked on that ever since, and it's just getting more and more interesting the more I go. And I ended up writing a book about it because I had to convince everybody that this was the most exciting thing that we could be doing. And instead of just rambling about it, I thought I read a book so I could just be like, here it is, this is what's happening, everybody get on board with this.
And now you have followers.
Now I have followers and a book and some startup projects. And I do consulting and designing in the space now.
Well, Katie, that's fascinating. I come to this from a lot of the transportation world, in particular the interoperable communication standards for intelligent transportation systems, traffic signals and call boxes and ramp meters. All of those are interoperable today. They speak one language. There's no ambiguity. And it was quite foreign to me when I came to this world of smart cities that no data sets are interoperable with anything else. City to city, public agency to public agency, doesn't work that way. So that might be a great segue to Melissa Wiley, our data analyst on the panel today.
Yeah, and I do come from the community perspective, and I often wonder, is it better to start at the community level and let it kind of spread out? I'm very new to the position. I work mostly in academia and consulting, and took this job to develop a performance measurement and management program, impact evaluation for the city, because it's such a critical time, and I feel like we can make a difference, and now's as good a time as any ever. So I am just in that process of wanting to learn from others in the field and just get the best strategies for cities to begin implementing.
I think also what's happened in our space, I mean, you're right that like when it comes to all of the environmental metrics, like we are so far behind. We're like 30 years behind like every other industry, like with the technology. And I think what has happened is that people that usually work in sustainability or climate change, I mean, we come from a background of studying environmental science or environmental engineering or environmental policy or physics or chemistry. So you've got all these people that understand the science of environmental impact, but nobody, well, not nobody, but most people, no one, there is not the training in those disciplines about what is the psychology of human influence. So you get somebody who might have a PhD in climate change or sustainability. They got put in a role as a city saying, now we want you to influence thousands of people to change, but they have no training and no background in that. And the people that do have training and background in that are people who work in advertising, who make movies, who design computer interfaces for gamification, game designers, behavioral psychologists. Like these are the people who their job is to influence people to do stuff. And that body of knowledge is just not in the training of people in sustainability and also in computer science. Like when you study environmental science, you don't do computer programming. Like it's not part of our what we learn. So you end up with all of this intelligence in Silicon Valley and computer programmers, all of this intelligence about how you influence people and create trends. And then it's kind of not, that knowledge is not coming into the people whose job it is to actually influence people. And so I think that's what makes us be very slow. Yeah, so you look, and you've got all these people that understand everything about climate change, but then it's like, well, how do you get 100 people to switch their car over to electric vehicle? Like, how do you actually get them to take that action? We don't study that.
You know, it's interesting because in the larger, I mean, a smart city really is is really just digital transformation of a particular domain. You know, there's three pillars of digital transformation. And, you know, one, of course, is the technology. The second is that technology then influences new business processes. But the third is the people. And those people need to support that new technology and those new processes. And that's really the one that we're talking about here that, frankly, gets forgotten about quite frequently.
What I do like about your book and some of your tools is that they're really easy to understand. A lot of great color palettes and very simple things to implement. You know, people are familiar with earning a badge or a sticker or and I think it does kind of simplify some of these more complex issues into methodologies that can be easily absorbed and utilized. Totally fascinated.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, so the book that I put together is I learned all of these tools of social influence and I meshed them together with my experience doing technical sustainability work, which I thought was really thrilling space to be in. And a lot of these techniques of social influence, like you really have to come to the problem thinking like a behavior designer. Most people come thinking like a scientist, and then they're kind of like, oh, why is everybody so greedy and lazy? And so we end up with the kind of like this negative worldview of like why don't they care more, you know? And it's because we're not coming through it through the lens of like a behavior designer. Like how do we get, you know, imagine like you had to get a rat to go from here to here to here. I'm like, well, if I have to get a person to then compost, switch their lights, change their car, you know, you've got to kind of create the labyrinth for them. And so these techniques can be very simple. They can be just like getting someone to write down a pledge, like a promise. Like if I write down in a letter to you, like, dear Melissa, I promise to, I don't know, eat an apple every day. Like I will do it, even if I never show you that letter, even if I just write it to myself, it has a psychological imprint because we take promises very seriously. And then if you show it out publicly, it's even more powerful. And then even just comparing one person's score against another, like this is how much you recycle versus you, that really motivates behavior. Giving people badges and stickers when they do a good job, that goes right into the reward part of the brain. We have a brain that responds to being rewarded. We want a cookie and a carrot. Just like when you train dogs and horses, they do something good, you give them a sugar cube. We want this reward system of our brain to be to get something good when we do a good job. And so when the environmental movement is just telling you you're a bad person all the time, like that is not training somebody to do a behavior and then giving them a cookie. So you can do that with badges and with stickers. So you can go out and do something fancy with an app, or you can just get a piece of paper in your office and then actually get literally like a sticker from the store and then write "good job" with a physical sticker and put it on the wall, and it will probably do just as well as if you get $100,000 and build some app, which probably would be overkill, right? So a lot of these things you can do in a really high-tech way with like satellite imagery and sensors, and millions of dollars, can be really elaborate, or you can just do them with like a pen and paper in a really simple way. And I think people should be totally leveraging the low-tech, simple way of doing behavior change design with just signs on the wall, stickers, smiley faces, and you know, if you want to move up to high tech, millions of dollars, you can do that too.
Something that you said reminded me of the ability of just disclosing data to have such an impact, and you had an example of the EPA. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the EPA's that's the EPA Toxic Release Inventory case study, which really blew my mind, because I was looking for examples to show that showing people data created change, and I was really struggling to find evidence. And then I found the EPA Toxic Release Inventory, and it's been said by influential people like Al Gore and like the head of major corporations and environmental groups that it has been one of the biggest success stories, environmental success stories of all time. And what happened was that the EPA asked all of the corporations in America to disclose the amount of toxic chemicals they were using. And they were not trying to change anything. It was not marketing. It wasn't even public. But within 5 years, they noticed that the levels dropped by 45%, which is a massive number. Like we're not doing that with CO2, right? Like it's really, really hard to get any change at all, let alone something that big. So all these academics started to study it, and they realized that just looking at the numbers, measuring the numbers, just disclosing the numbers to somebody else just naturally had an effect, right? As you think it might do. But it was a really powerful case study for something really, really big, like major corporations and environmental pollutants, a strong piece of evidence to show that it works. And then that type of theory of the government making industry disclose their environmental performance. They won't necessarily do it all on their own. You usually need government policy to tell them to do it. It's a very interesting strategy, because instead of telling people what they should do, like you have to recycle, you have to plant more trees, which, you know, can be a little bit difficult for government to legislate. You're just telling people telling governments to disclose the data. And then you're like, we just want the data to be open, and then you guys can do what you want. And so that can be easier to get through, because usually the more right-wing leaning people don't want the environmental policy, the left-wing people do want it. You can say, we're not going to make you do anything, we just want the data out there, and that's easier to get through both sides of government. And it's getting more and more popular, and there are more and more case studies proving how influential this public data is. And if you're trying to develop a program, obviously what you need is the data. So it works well for everybody to have more and more disclosure of data that we can use to influence people.
When did this movement of public disclosure of data really restart itself?
Restart? When did it restart? It started and then it went away.
I know that there's one of the founding fathers of the United States had a quote, something about sunlight cleanses, and it was about, if you release data, the sunlight, having it be in the open air would eliminate some of the problems that might otherwise occur. But is this something that's happened in the last few years, or?
Well, I only got really stuck into this a few years ago, so I'm not quite sure. I haven't gone way back to founding fathers, a bit early in history for my knowledge. But that EPA toxic release inventory was I think the really big one that was in the sort of mid to late 90s, where that came out. And that was in response to the Bhopal disaster in India, where they had that gas explosion that killed thousands. Of a very tragic incident. But then if you look at, it's happening in other industries. So you've got nutritional labels. Like nutritional labels weren't always there, and then they were there. You've got car safety ratings. Cars didn't used to have safety ratings, and now they have them, and they're very strongly legislated. We've got energy efficiency ratings for appliances, and it wasn't there, and now it is. So it's coming throughout all sorts of industries, this type of disclosure. And then the type of communication, like how you design that data to influence people. And I think more recently, like in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of movement on the technology side, because technology has been evolving so much. We're getting more Wi-Fi networks, sensors are getting cheaper. You know, there's a company called Aclima, which attaches air pollution sensors to cars and gets this really granular mapping of a city. They'll drive cars all over the city, and then they will capture the air pollution. So you know it property by property, you know, not just one store for the whole city. You're getting better image processing of satellites. So you can just get satellite data and then turn that into pixels and then figure out, you know, how different bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, how they track to different data. There's just been such a big spike in technology innovation and making that technology more accessible that we can do a whole lot of stuff now that we couldn't do like just 5 or 10 years ago. You couldn't really do. And just in like web programming, like you can just build websites and apps so much more easily than you used to be able to do.
True.
Well, you know, open data and transparency is really one of the initiatives that Smart Cities rests on. And so most cities have developed an open data portal. Some are more comprehensive than others, but we kind of already have some of that compare to your neighbor data. Do you think that cities can kind of challenge each other in a gamification type of way? Or do you think that cities would be better off collaborating to make a collective impact through some gamification mechanism?
Oh, well, I think that's like a super interesting question that I'm really fascinated by, and nobody's really worked that out yet. There's one example in my book, the only case study I could find of city to city competition, because I was really curious about this, was something that happened in Oklahoma, where Men's Health magazine did a ranking of, like, they called it the fattest cities in America, and Oklahoma came up as the fattest city. And the mayor got really incensed by this, and he was like, I am not going to have America's fattest city. And he said he was really overweight himself, and he was like, we have to do something about this. So he made this campaign called Losing 1 Million Pounds, and he collaborated with a local radio station, and they did this thing, and he asked everybody. I think he was like a popular, charismatic mayor. Everybody loved him, and they did it. People started tracking their weight loss on the app, and then they got a 1% tax through to fund bike paths and urban greenery, which apparently went completely through, like nobody went against it, which they said was like unheard of, you know. And so he does not tell this story in the context of gamification or data at all. He just tells it as a story of how he helped this city. But I saw it, I was like, that happened by social rank, that happened by comparison. It was comparing one city against another, and then it sparked this real passion to change the city. And so that was the only case study I could find where that had happened. But I personally have a hunch that if we can replicate that better through the way that we're designing interfaces and the way that we're designing campaigns, you know, we're doing it with air pollution, with urban greenery, with waste, recycling, CO2 emissions, that we could potentially manifest people to have those kind of breakthrough moments, because it's really an emotional space that you're manifesting in someone when they decide to take on, and they're like, I will spend the next 3 years devoting myself to this project that I've invented, that we can kind of like manifest that that emotional reaction in people. So they sort of start these projects, and the social rank is what it kind of inspires them to do that. But also in your question, you mentioned, you know, this dualism between you know, are you getting people to compete or are you getting them to collaborate? And I don't think that is something that's mutually exclusive. It's something people ask me a lot about leaderboards and stuff, like, oh, if you're putting everyone on a leaderboard, does that mean that, you know, you're kind of like creating this like almost like cutthroat, kind of a mean sort of competition? And I don't think that's what happens. I think it's really just about disclosing the data, and everybody's on the upward spiral together. So if one person's an outlier at the bottom, the idea is kind of like we're all like going on a big like mountain hike together. One person's trailing behind, one person's in front. We're all kind of like trying to get up the mountain together, and knowing where we are in our rank kind of helps us all collaborate. So I don't want to have people think that it's one or the other.
That I have noticed some beginnings of gamification, and found a public sector money ball, and it's for mayors to complete different, you know, initiatives or goals, and there's a leaderboard for that. And I thought that's interesting. It's coming around, but you know, right now I think in the public sector it's still in the larger arenas, the think tanks, Aspen Institute, Race Forward, various nonprofits, philanthropy based organizations, but I haven't really seen any within cities. And what I liked about your book was the do-it-yourself part, where you can't believe what you could make with $40 or something. I think it would be great if you could make a manual of all the cheap implements. That would be great.
Well, I don't know what they are yet. I mean, I'd have to go through everything. And I mean, people have just got to work it out for themselves, though. Like, if you want to change something, like I've been working on this project now called Urban Canopy, which I just love working on. And I think it's got great potential, which is taking high resolution thermal photographs of cities during summer. And it's sort of, the way it's going now is it's pretty high tech. We've got an aircraft we're going to hire with a $200,000 camera, and it's going to become like a web app. But the way I started with that idea was, first I thought, I know air conditioning is a problem on the grid. That's really where I started with, Right. And then I was like, well, could I get a drone? I didn't even think I thought of a drone. I said, like, what if I got a thermal camera and took a photograph of a building, and then I could see that it was like hot on one side, and then I could go to the building and be like, look, your wall is really hot. Why don't you put in a green wall? Because I just love green walls and I want to see green walls everywhere. Mm-hmm. So my thinking was pretty simple. And I looked up, and you can get thermal cameras. You can get one that attaches to your iPhone for $400. Doesn't need to be really expensive. I thought maybe I could work with a green wall company, and I'll take photos and sell green walls to buildings, whatever. And then I looked at drones, and I called up a drone company, and I'd be like, could you do a little map, or could we make it 3D? And then they were like, well, if you really want to do a big area, you should speak to an aircraft company. So then I called an aircraft company, and they were like, yeah, that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars. And I was like, this is crazy. Why can't I hire my own aircraft? So I look up how to hire an aircraft. I was like, maybe you can. I mean, my dad was a pilot. I'm like, I know you can hire aircraft. So, and then I was like, well, how do you attach the camera? So I was like, how to attach the camera to the aircraft. And then this company came up that was like, we make, attachments for aircrafts. So I spoke to this guy, and he's really helpful. He does all this stuff, and he's like, I'll work with you. It doesn't need to be that expensive. And I was like, wow, this is actually totally viable to, and he's like, listen, I can get the camera from Fleur rented for you, so you don't need to pay for it. And I was like, this is actually really doable. And I figured out how to put all the pieces together and build it. And now, I mean, we haven't done it yet. It's still sort of somewhere between idea and pilot. But it's totally viable, totally doable, doesn't need enormously advanced technical skills. But just because I kind of got in the headspace, this kind of Silicon Valley hacker headspace of, I can do this myself with a thermal camera. I'm going to walk out on the street and just photograph a building. It just kind of led to one thing to one thing to one thing to one thing. And then
I think you're bringing up the creativity that you really speak about quite a bit in the book, about spending a certain amount of time, and that's actually a task that needs to be scheduled.
Yeah, totally. So with something like that, Urban Canopy, if I get myself into the headspace every day of, I need to check all my emails, make sure I've done all my financial bill paying stuff, I've gone to try and make my monthly salary all happen for me, and clean the house. I'm not in that headspace, right? Not to say that I don't do those things, but it's about prioritizing your time. If you just try and do that, you don't go to the gym, right? You never run the marathon. But if I get up in the morning and I say, how do I do the most creative work I can do today? And then tomorrow I'll do all that life stuff.
Right.
Then I think, wow, maybe I could get a drone, and maybe I'll call an aircraft company, and then maybe I'll learn some, new sort of computer satellite image way of doing something, and maybe I'll write a blog post on it. And then I just get into this really excited headspace of ideas, and it's not with the mission of being productive or trying to make money or anything like that. It's just trying to channel this pure imagination, creative energy. And that is always where the best stuff comes from in my work. It's the stuff that ends up leading me to get paid. It's where I make great human connections. And ultimately, me getting in that headspace is what kind of fuels all of the really great stuff. And it's it's starting to fall in love with the process of changing the world, rather than being all oh my God, we're all going to die from climate change, everyone's bad. It's a very negative, restrictive mental space to be in. Dream is that I never have to check any emails or pay any bills. I can just be in that space all the time. It hasn't come true yet.
Katie,
daydreaming. We come from a world of frameworks and conceptual models, and it seems like everything needs to be structured. But you're saying just let it go. Just wander down that mental road, see where it leads you.
Yeah, of course. Or just do it. Maybe if you can do it like one day in the open imagination space, and then 2 days in the, organizational structured space, or just like I started this with just doing 1 hour every morning, and 1 hour very quickly became like 3 hours. And just making sure that you're always prioritizing yourself to give a bit of energy to that,
Sure.
to that space. And I just find it completely transformative in how you go about trying to change the world.
It really is. People get into that zone when they're creative and calm and quiet. Some of us do it very early in the morning. Correct, Melissa?
I call it late at night.
The world as we know it, to move things forward, we know it's very structured. It's quite siloed. It's quite, it's a big challenge. I'm just fascinated by some of your perspectives, Katie, of creating these, motivational stickers. My young daughter, we use it on her. She's got her sticker board. Why not use it on adults? Gamification. I had a podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago with Michael Mazer of Colu, small company, COLU, that is doing something I thought was just absolutely astounding. They've created a gamification system for local business districts, cities, and it's not just about getting a discount on parking to go to a restaurant. It's if you visit a park, you get a little bit of bonus for this or that. So they're wrapping it around all the city services. You might get a little longer on your library book if you're a frequent user, or things like that. They've wrapped in just about everything they could do. The e-bikes and bike rentals and all of that into a city loyalty program to drive the human quality of life component of sustainability.
Oh, was that the question? Sorry.
Oh no, it was a bit of a comment, and I just
Okay.
I just am fascinated by companies and individuals that are not bound by the standard conceptions and boundaries of what we see every day of silos and the legacy approach to things, particularly in the public sector.
Yeah, well, we have to. This is the one thing that I just feel like I'm just like trying to scream from the rooftops all the time. And my TED talk is all about this. I don't know if you've seen it, but I just slaved over 2 months to put together a TED talk to try and tell this story that like trying to change the world, to build a new and better world should be the ultimate creative process. Like it should be an art form that we're really in. Like we don't need to think the way that we've always thought before. We don't need to do things the way we always have done before. Like the world is our canvas. Like we can create it. I grew up doing art. Like my mother was an artist and my grandparents were like technical artists.
Okay.
This idea of being able to like take a piece of clay and just mold it into a sculpture, or like get a piece of silk and paint on it. This is so natural to me. And when I look at a city street, I'm like, well, why can't we just put green walls and trees everywhere and bicycles? Like what's got wrong with everywhere? Come on, why can't we just make this happen? And we kind of take for granted that the world is the way it is. And it's just, this is the way the job is structured, the company is structured, and the streets and the freeways are structured. But, like there's this line in a song from Ani DeFranco where she says, all of this was just someone's idea. It might as well have been mine. Like it's like an activist song, trying to get in her own space of influencing stuff. But, we can influence the world, and the world is influenced by people trying. Like if you never try to change the world will never, ever change. But people do really change things. And I think getting into that, seeing your craft as a creative process, kind of like an artist, you are going to come from a totally different mind space. And this idea that the world is a little bit like clay, that we can actually influence it, that we do have agency over it. That's a really different emotional space to inhabit in yourself than someone who just believes that the world is all fixed and you are almost like a victim of the world. Like you just have to fit into the structure and you'll never change it. And it is like a bit intimidating to try and change the world. Like you have to have meetings that you've never had before and ask for money for things. And you're in a kind of emotionally vulnerable space when you're trying to do things that have not been done before. But if we teach people that we can actually influence the structures around us, and they actually are designed, like local governments and the whole political system is designed to be influenced. Nobody really tells you that. It's actually got all of these systems for you to feed into to change. Bit of work to figure it out, but that it's kind of like built to evolve. And in that way, the kind of universe wants us to evolve. Like we've been evolving since we were amoebas. Like we've got to keep, keep the momentum going. And this is just like, we just don't learn this at school or at university, like when you're in your pollution chemistry textbook. Like influencing the world is kind of part of our job. We get it. It's kind of big in Silicon Valley. That's why I ended up there, because it's a really big part of the culture. Everyone's trying to like change the world.
Right.
But the culture, that culture should be everywhere. It's a wonderful place to be, to try and imagine the world, think of how you can make it better. It's a really enriching, wonderful place. It's where good things come from. So let's all sort of try and inhabit that as our kind of like a central worldview, I think.
Well, I think you're modeling exactly what the fourth industrial revolution worker is going to look like. I mean, you've combined environmental engineering with psychology, with coding and gaming and all kinds of stuff, even art, and I think it's going to take a lot of cross training and pulling in those different specialties when you can't, develop them all yourself, Katie. But, I think you really, you role model that nicely, that it's not, we can't be so even focused on our career, just like we can't be siloed in departments or units. You've got to bring it all out.
Yeah, I mean, people do get very siloed, I mean, I just personally didn't ever want to be siloed, so I was just tend to jump around a bit, like I wanted to be friends with people who are artists and friends who are engineers, and there is a bit of a dark side that I feel like I never really fit in anywhere. So I'm not saying I don't want to be like, oh, it's amazing, but I'm sort of always feel like a bit of a misfit no matter where I am. But like, I think being able to immerse yourself, like to be, like I'm the environmental engineer around the game designers when I go to like game design meetups and conferences, and that's cool because I feel like I'm not probably the only one that's ever been there, but I'm like, why aren't there more? Like, why isn't everybody, like, I don't want to be the only one. And why aren't there more artists like connecting with behavioral psychology people, thinking like, well, how can I really creatively display these behavioral psychology messages really beautifully? Because often behavioral psychology people aren't designers, like they won't be able to make it look great. So those people can come together. And sense of people working with, I don't know, just architects to show the data. I mean, if everybody like gets together a little bit more from different disciplines, that's where innovation happens. And I don't know why it makes people tend to be so siloed. I suppose it's just the way everything's built with the training. But if I can encourage people to try and like jump hoops, do something that's totally different that you've never done before, like jump to a totally different field and try and absorb some knowledge and see what happens when you bring them together.
It sounds like this could be an interesting track within a Smart Cities conference or some, it's a really neat niche, and you've got something there, clearly.
Or maybe you could have a conference where you get teams together, one computer scientist, somebody who specializes in environmental sensors, a user interface designer, a game designer, and a behavioral psychologist, and maybe a person who works in cities, like a city bureaucracy person who can tell you how the system works, and put them all together and then tell them to come up with something. That would be really cool.
Interdisciplinary design challenge.
Yep. I think the magic would happen if you could hold a conference based around those principles.
Yeah, because I think you're right. They're not mutually exclusive, the collaboration and the competition. Because even with this group, the Smart Cities group, we have an awesome opportunity to talk to folks around the globe, share ideas. But I'm not going to lie, if I got a bigger sticker than Jim did, that's going to motivate me even more. So I think that we can, be collegial about the competition. If kids can do it, so can we.
Yeah, totally. I really don't think that the competition is anything negative. I see it more as disclosure of data, creating an upward spiral. Like that's the lens I view it through. And I haven't seen any evidence that it's not like that. Like nobody's mean, nobody's disheartened. It's generally everyone's just kind of like, oh wow, look at those numbers. Better try and do better. Like,
yeah, I agree. It's like we're on the same softball team.
Yeah, we're on the same team, and we're all just trying to do better.
Exactly.
And the
We
little
all
bit
want
of
to get a home run. We do. I mean, that's just human
and the
nature.
little bit of competition that does happen, like we've got this Chrome extension called Energy Lollipop, and I've been interviewing people, and it's like everyone's on a leaderboard, and it's early stage, so it's like 30 of my friends, you know, and they're like, "Why is Jim doing better than me?" You know, it's a little bit, you know, but it's not like negative, like he doesn't want to hurt Jim, you know. It's just like
Right.
I am going to turn all my lights off, and I am going to beat him. So it's all a very friendly sort of energy to it.
It does,
Nobody's
yeah.
like, oh God, look at that loser, like who's just like used so much electricity yesterday. We're not going to invite them to the party. We're going to shame them on social media. Like nobody is
That's
behaving
funny.
that way. That would be a negative issue.
We have to make the mission more fun. Just be
It
silly.
should be fun. What's not fun about saving the world? It's like the funnest thing you can do, you know?
I agree. I totally agree.
Well, this has been great, Katie. It's been great getting to know you, Melissa. Thank you for joining us. We've got a few minutes left. What last closing comments do each of you have?
You've got to come up with a more specific question than that. There's
I-
open.
You're the author.
I would want everyone to know that Katie is offering her Udemy class free of charge, and it's really great. And there's a ton of free resources on our website, and these are really robust. I'm looking at the gamified Earth Matrix right now, and you just came up with that sitting around with your creative head, and it's such a quick tool to use. So I would encourage folks to go out and look at some of those materials and begin to think about how we can collaborate in among cities, states, etc., and make this fun, because COVID has not been fun, and I think that we maybe have some momentum to, party like it's 2020. I don't know. You're right. You got to put a positive spin on everything, because you will never get the behavior you're looking for by condemning someone.
Well, certainly the legacy approaches to the large problems we all face, in society worldwide, haven't been as productive as we all might have hoped. So it really comes to those, creative folks, in our community, the artists, the engineers that are creative, those that can break out of that mold a little bit. And Katie, I applaud you for that wonderful book, because it helps people facilitate and get into that mindset of, being quiet, being creative, and thinking, it's overused, but thinking outside the box.
Well, I mean, it's been totally transformative for my life, changing my thinking over to that. And in terms of a closing thought, this thing, it's not that crazy to do, right? The structure in my book says, figure out what your numbers are, figure out where you want to go. If where you want to go is 0 carbon or 50% tree cover or 0 waste, just put a number on it, put a number where you are now, and then imagine what that world will be like. Brainstorm. That's the creative process. So it's putting numbers, it's putting numerical change, real strategy together with the kind of more like lofty, sort of excited creative space, and then kind of looking at that and then figure out how do you reverse engineer that. Lots of imagination and creativity, but then very serious practical steps for you to get to that measurable place. So that's a wonderful creative process, and that it is inherently positive because you can see the goal. You can be like, that's what we're going for. We're going for 50% tree cover. It's inherently optimistic and positive by having a goal. And the idea is you actually reach your goal. Like, why would you be bothered doing it if you thought the world was all doom and gloom and nothing would ever change?
That's a swell idea.
And that's what makes it fun. And then you get into the space of like, well, we're going for here a goal. Like, how do we make more fun? How do we get people involved? How do we share the vision? How do we give people like a brain cookie, when they do a good job? And that's where all the gamification comes in, to try and like bring everybody along that journey. So if people who are working with cities realize that we can really use data to inspire positive change and fun and gamification as a backbone. And yeah, I have lots of free resources on my website, katiepatrick.com. It's in more detail in the book that's on Amazon, and on my website there's a workbook with lots of case studies. And I have a course, and I also do this stuff as a freelancer. I design projects, and I do interface designs for environmental data, and I can work on projects more seriously. So there's all the things people can get into, from free to complicated, with what I do.
Wow. Well, Katie, thank you very much. Melissa, great to have you again. Melissa, keep an eye out for an upcoming podcast that also focuses on data analytics and the whole COVID situation we're living through that we recently recorded. And thanks, everyone, for listening in today. Thanks, Katie and Melissa. Take care. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.